So, today I want to talk about redistricting and how this current system leads the country to conservative outcomes. So, when I say redistricting, what I'm generally referring to is gerrymandering. In the time around 2010 when the census happened, it's not a secret at this point that the Republican Party used gerrymandering as a tool to maintain its power, both on a federal and local level. When you can reshape districts and you can use technology and tools to optimize your districts so that not just the local elections, but the state elections and the federal electoral officials are chosen in such a way that the districts are represented by people who are majority Republican, you can give more seats to your party, effectively rigging the election and giving your party an artificial inflation of power, even if the majority of the population doesn't support that particular party. Now, since there was a census that happened in 2020, it's time for another round of redistricting, and as usual, it's being played for power by the Republicans. And in the meanwhile, Democrats are trying to play fair in a way that preserves the two party dynamic and ultimately leads the country in an undemocratic and conservative direction. When we look at what's going on here, we have to start off with this article from Politico, where Democrats' House targets vanish as the GOP draws new maps. Now, House Democrats spent the past two elections crowing and ousting Republicans from longtime red districts that had suddenly grown competitive. Now, Republicans are about to make many of those targets disappear from the battlefield entirely. Again, when you control who gets to pick who is elected, it's not the politicians seeking the people, but the people now being adjusted to the politicians so that the political entity can remain in power. GOP mapmakers are readying to shore up more than a dozen of the most hotly contested House battlegrounds from the past 4 years, narrowing Democrats' path to maintain control of the House as they prepare for midterm elections that are historically tough for the party in power. Democrats got their first taste of a shrinking playing field on Tuesday when Republican state lawmakers in Indiana unveiled a draft congressional plan that would transform the state's most competitive districts into a relatively safe red seat by siphoning off voters in deep blue Marion County, which includes Indianapolis. And as they point out, the deck is stacked, Hale said. It's not impossible for Democrats to seriously contest that seat again. She conceded, but it won't be competitive soon. We probably won't see a real race for a number of years. And so that's what the strategy seems to be for the Republicans going forward. And what they're essentially doing is taking every single census that happens and making it so that the a possibility of a race in certain districts is removed for about 8 to 10 years. And that's all they need because then the next census, they can reproduce this exact same result. And when we look at a place like Ohio, for example, you have a situation where Republican lawmakers are literally presenting a map that says, oh, we get a 62 to 37 advantage in the House and a 23 to 10 advantage in the Senate. And you get a response from the Democrats saying, oh, well, we'll give you a counteroffer of, well, you guys get a 57 to 42 advantage in the House and a 20 to 13 advantage in the Senate. But that's not considered good enough. And the problem is that even if the Democrats decide to go against the proposals, the Republicans can push it through for 4 years and then reevaluate. And so you have a lot of these different instances where the Republicans essentially get to control who gets, how many votes they get in the House of Representatives. Now, of course, this will mean that they get to produce more bills like the ones we're seeing in places like Texas and Florida that are producing a lot of negative outcomes for people, whether it be the abortion laws that are being passed, or whether it be the type of laws that are trying to prevent equality of voting or restricting voting rights access. You're going to see a lot of these different laws just get pushed through these very conservative and Republican houses and senates. And when they control this and the Democrats decide to play fair, that's the kind of thing that happens. And the reason we know this is that while New York will lose one seat, the GOP might lose 5 in the state of New York. And this is again being done based on drawing fair lines. And the thing is every time the Republicans try to push things in the direction of making it in their favor, the Democrats respond with bipartisan commissions that are always interested in creating fair outcomes. Now, in this case, we know this because, again, in New York, you had a situation where gerrymandered districts were completely outlawed. So, what's essentially happening is the Democrats are playing fair, which makes it equal for both parties, while the Republicans are specifically stacking the deck in their favor. And this is continuously pursued and is continuously happening. And when we look at states that are gaining votes and seats in the House of Representatives, we have to note that Texas and Florida are gaining, North Carolina is gaining, Colorado's gaining, and states that are generally blue, like California and New York, are losing seats. And so, what this really boils down to is that when you have a state like New York losing seat, and you end up in places like Florida and Texas gaining seats, what they're going to do is take the population and redistrict it in ways that are going to benefit the Republicans to take the majority of those seats. Even in areas where Democrats might be in control and new populations entering, whether it be in Texas, where you have people from California moving in, or you have an increasing immigrant population that is much more likely to vote Democrat, you're going to redistrict around that increased population in order to make it so that the majority of the people coming out of that state who are representatives are going to be Republican. So the increase in population doesn't necessarily agree or conform to the increase in population's decision-making process. So even if the majority of the people in those two states would lean Democrat in the two-party system, the representatives are likely to be Republican due to this very same system and the effects of gerrymandering. So again, that's one way that it leans the country conservative, and again, it'll allow more of the bills to take place. Now, one of the solutions that was proposed was the For the People Act, to make it so that you'd have something that could somewhat call for a mix of Democrats, Republicans, and independents and create an independent commission that would be a lot more fair and just in terms of deciding who gets to pick districts. Now, personally, I don't think this is going to work. For one, you're not going to get it passed because of the filibuster. The Senate is going to get locked down every single time, and nothing is going to change. But even if by some miracle it did get passed, I do not think this would effectively change things, because what the For the People Act essentially calls for is 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 5 independent observers to vote. And that still requires a majority of those to vote in favor of this, meaning that you would need something that would effectively be voted as a majority based on those 15 people. But in addition to that, you have to have at least one Republican, one Democrat, and one independent, as far as I understand it, agree to this decision-making process. Meaning at the end of the day, a Republican has to agree to every decision, essentially making it so that a far-right politician can essentially block all the redistricting until it suits their party's interest, effectively creating a new form of filibuster that will make it so that nothing actively gets done and the Republicans can maintain power over a greater number of districts. Now, it's also worth noting that this type of power situation doesn't just belong to local districts and the House of Representatives, which is where we often see a lot of the issues around congressional understandings. But we need to acknowledge that the Senate and Supreme Court are also complicit in this process. The system really isn't working at all, and it certainly isn't democratic in any fair measure. States with lower populations will always have more say in the Senate. And we have seen so far that you only need 41 senators to effectively make the Senate useless and prevent any serious change from happening. No matter how much of the population is in favor of something, you could have 70% of the people in favor of one thing happening, and when you have Republicans dominating local elections and controlling the state houses and senates, you can see laws manifest like the abortion laws and the voting rights discrimination laws that I mentioned before, but then you get no challenge from the only opposition that it has, the federal Congress, because when you have 41 senators that only have to be in low population states with largely rural populations and largely with wealthy people being able to buy up property and land and say that they're from that place, you can control the Senate. And if you have 41 senators, you control the voting and the entire legislative process as long as the filibuster remains in effect. So effectively, you can't challenge it on a federal legislative level because the Senate doesn't work. And then the Supreme Court, of course, being an unelected body of now conservative supermajority, makes it unaccountable to the desires of people and makes the court unlikely to challenge any of these local laws. And this is the effective strategy to keep conservatism in effect. And effectively, the Republican Party will stay alive because of this. And while people don't want to hear this in general, especially if they're Democrats, the conservative Democrats who are effectively bought out by the exact same companies and corporations are, as the Republicans, are going to have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo and allowing this two-party system to continue to flourish so that nothing good actually comes to people. The maintenance of the status quo, the preservation of peace, and the constant fair play of the Democratic Party is complicit in keeping the Republicans in power and maintaining this system. And effectively, they would prefer that to any sort of leftist agenda or positions actually getting any sort of power. And that isn't just actual leftist positions, but also including any social democratic positions that would be considered normal in a lot of other countries in the world. And they will effectively stop all of this to prevent things like universal health care, to prevent things like actual fair voting in elections, and the maintenance of this system will continue to maintain us being in a broken economy, a broken system, and continue to affect people who need a lot of care and are desperate at this point. And the system really is broken, and we do need to address that in a way that is outside of what keeps happening. Things need to change sooner rather than later, and they're just not capable of doing so as people try to maintain power. So with that said, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and the bell for notifications. You can follow me on Twitter and check out my Discord in the description down below. My name is Anarchist Tara, and I thank you for watching.